Hello, in my previous video I gave a brief description of each of the 7 deadly sins and described the negative consequences of each of these sins in order to give an idea of why we should be avoiding each of these sins. What is it about these sins that actually makes them sinful and immoral? And briefly, the 7 deadly sins are wrath, or also called anger, pride, also called vanity, avarice, also called greed, envy, gluttony, lust, and sloth. And in this video, I want to do some critical thinking about the 7 deadly sins, to analyze them a bit and get a better understanding of them. And I'm going to start by looking at a contrary view about the 7 deadly sins and criticizing that view. And this view comes from the Satanic Bible by LaVey, in which he's whitewashing the 7 deadly sins. He's describing each of these sins as being not so bad as we normally think of them as being, and saying, hey, let's all be sinful as much as we want to gratify ourselves. Okay, and I'll begin by reading what he says. The 7 deadly sins of the Christian church are greed, pride, envy, anger, gluttony, lust, and sloth. Satanism advocates indulging in each of these sins, as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. A Satanist knows there is nothing wrong with being greedy, as it only means that he wants more than he already has. Envy means to look with favor upon the possessions of others, and to be desirous of obtaining similar things for oneself. Envy and greed are the motivating forces of ambition, and without ambition, very little of any importance would be accomplished. Gluttony is simply eating more than you need to keep yourself alive. When you have overeaten to the point of obesity, another sin, pride, will motivate you to regain an appearance that will renew your self-respect. Being reluctant to get up in the morning is to be guilty of sloth, and if you lie in bed long enough, you may find yourself committing another sin, lust. To have the faintest stirring of sexual desire is to be guilty of lust. In order to ensure the propagation of humanity, nature made lust the second most powerful instinct, the first being self-preservation. Realizing this, the Christian church made fornication the original sin. The strongest instinct in every living thing is self-preservation, which brings us to the last of the 7 deadly sins, anger. It is not our instinct for self-preservation that is aroused. Is it not our instinct for self-preservation that is aroused when someone harms us, when we become angry enough to protect ourselves from further attack? Okay, so there's LaVey's discussion of the 7 deadly sins, and as he describes them, they don't seem like such bad things. However, he's describing them inaccurately. And let's look at each of these. Greed, he says, it only means that he wants more than he already has. That's just not what greed is. Greed is an inordinate desire for other things. And let's go back to the description of avarice here. It's an immoderate desire for riches. An avaricious person is treating things of instrumental value as though they have intrinsic value. That goes beyond simply wanting more than what you already have. And consider that a person may be destitute and impoverished and want more than he has simply because he needs more than he has. That would not be greed, that would be simply wanting basic human needs to be fulfilled. Okay, he says, envy means to look with favor upon the possessions of others and to be desirous of obtaining similar things for oneself. This is a common understanding of envy, and it may be a component of envy. But envy is more about feeling pain at other people's success. It's pain felt at the success of others. And extreme envy, say, is hatred of the good for being the good, as Ayn Rand puts it. And this is not simply wanting what other people have. This is not mere ambition. This is resenting other people for being superior or better off than you are. And so LaVey is not giving an accurate description of envy here. And he says, gluttony is simply eating more than you need to keep yourself alive. And this simply is not what gluttony is. Any one of us may eat more than we need to keep ourselves alive simply because we cannot gauge the exact amount we need to keep ourselves alive, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Also, gluttony is an orientation towards considering food and drink to be more important than life itself. That is, considering food and drink to be the purpose for living rather than eating and drink in order to live. Your life should be the purpose for your eating and drinking. Eating and drinking should not be your purpose for living. Gluttony turns that around. So, gluttony is not simply the action of eating more than you need to keep alive. It's a different orientation towards food and drink. Okay, then we have sloth, and he says, being reluctant to get up in the morning is to be guilty of sloth. Well, this is not always true. Consider that if you go to bed late and you need to get up early, you will probably be reluctant to get up in the morning. But that just means you're tired, that you have not yet gotten enough sleep. That is not the same thing as sloth. Sloth is the aversion to work, to effort. And it's a general attitude towards life of refusing to make the effort to accomplish things. And this is not the same thing as a mere reluctance to get up in the morning. Although, of course, sloth can lead to this reluctance to get up in the morning. It can be due to sloth, but it isn't always. And he says, to have the faintest stirring of sexual desire is to be guilty of lust. And this is not true. Lust, as described as one of the sins, is not mere sexual desire. Lust is an excess of sexual desire, an excessive focus on sexual desire, an inordinate desire to have sex with someone. But it's normal to feel sexual desire. I normally feel sexual desire towards very attractive women. In fact, that's how I usually tell that a woman is attractive, by the sexual desire I feel for her. But this is not the same thing as the sin of lust. This does not mean that I'm going to rape her or that I'm going to be obsessed with thoughts of having sex with her. That would be lust, but mere sexual desire is not the sin of lust. And then he associates anger with self-preservation, with our instinct for self-preservation. And anger has to do with more than an instinct for self-preservation. It's not simply that your life is threatened and you get angry to protect yourself, which is the suggestion given by what LaVey is saying here. The idea with wrath, you can get angry about other things than mere self-preservation. Consider the case of Medea. She gets wrathful at being left by her husband. That might have something to do with self-preservation, but when she kills her own children, they were not threatening her self-preservation. She's doing that to hurt Jason. She's trying to hurt someone, not simply protect herself. And so wrath is going beyond self-preservation. And I think I skipped over pride. Another sin, pride will motivate you to regain an appearance that will renew your self-respect. So he's equating pride with self-respect. Self-respect is not a sin, and it's not the sin of pride. Self-respect is a good thing, but pride goes well beyond mere self-respect. Pride is an inordinate idea that your worth is much greater than it actually is. It's an overestimation of your own value, which goes beyond mere self-respect. Okay, one of the things that LaVey is not recognizing when he talks about the 7 deadly sins is that each of these is an excess. It's not simply the act of or mere tendency. He seems to characterize them as acts or mere tendencies, like eating too much or feeling sexual desire towards someone. And this is contrary to Aristotle's idea of vices and of virtues. Aristotle understands a virtue to be the mean between two extremes. One extreme will be a deficiency, and the other extreme will be an excess. And this deficiency and this excess will be with regard to something. It'll be concerned with some particular passion or other. Here, for example, we have anger, and a deficiency of that Aristotle would call spiritlessness, and an excess of it irascibility. Note that irascibility begins with ira. Ira is the Latin word for wrath. So it's from the same root. It's the same root as the word irate, which you may be more familiar with. And the mean here is good temper. So a good-tempered person might become angry and still be good-tempered, but doesn't go to the extreme of wrath. For example, you might learn about bad things being done and want to do something to put a stop to that, but not go to the extreme of wanting to destroy or hurt the people who are doing those bad things. Now, a spiritless person doesn't have much energy for things. Doesn't really care much about things. Low spirits, and is not really moved to anger very much, even when he should be. The good-tempered person is moved to anger when he should be, and is not moved to anger when he shouldn't be, and is not moved to an excess of anger. Whereas the wrathful person is moved to an excess of anger, or moved to anger when he should not be angered. And so that's one example of an excess and a deficiency. And Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, describes 6 of the 7 deadly sins. He doesn't describe all 7. He's not trying to describe the 7 deadly sins in this book. And in fact, he writes several hundred years before the 7 deadly sins were codified. But, next we have pride, which in the translation I was using he calls vanity. And this is an excess with respect to honor or dishonor. The vain person believes that greater honors are due to him than really are. The deficiency is undue humility. This person does not believe that honors are due to him very much, even when they are. So he has a lower opinion of himself than he should have. And the magnanimous person has a more accurate opinion of himself. He recognizes his faults but also his strengths. He's well aware of his strengths, but doesn't go to the extreme of the proud person who thinks he has strengths that he doesn't really have. Okay, Aristotle describes envy as an excess of indignation. We may feel righteous indignation, which he describes as the mean here, when we see good things happening to bad people. When we see that very bad people are well off, are rich, have nice families, and so on, we may feel righteous indignation about that. And that is virtuous, according to Aristotle. But with envy, we feel bad when good things happen even to people who deserve those good things. Because the envious person feels pain on another person's success because he feels that's a threat to his own success, not simply because he feels they don't deserve it. And the deficiency here is spite, which is a general maliciousness towards people. A spiteful person likes to see people in pain regardless of their merits. Okay, now avarice can be associated with what Aristotle calls meanness here, or stinginess, and which he identifies this as a deficiency with regard to getting and spending. The mean person, the stingy person, wants to hold on to what he has and is reluctant to give it up. The excess of this is prodigality. The prodigal person is a spendthrift. Think of the prodigal son, the parable told by Jesus. The prodigal son takes his inheritance from his father early. He goes off and he just wastes it, and he comes back without any of his money. And some people think of a prodigal son as a son who goes away, but really a prodigal son means the son who is a spendthrift, and so that's what prodigality is. And liberality is the mean here between avarice and prodigality, and that is using money in an appropriate way. Spending it to help people, spending it on yourself to enjoy life, but not overdoing it, and not holding on to what you have too closely either. And finally, Aristotle associates both gluttony and lust with what he calls self-indulgence, which is an excess with regard to pleasure and pain. The gluttonous person and the lustful person both overindulge in pleasures. The gluttonous person overindulges in the pleasures of eating and drinking. The lustful person overindulges in the pleasures of sexual activity. And he believes that the mean here is temperance, which is to control your desires better. And the deficiency here is insensibility, to not even be sensible to the pleasures of eating and drinking or to the pleasures of sex. And he believes that is also a vice. And so the goal here is not simply abstinence in the case of lust, but the idea here is, the goal here is temperance, to enjoy eating and drinking, to enjoy sex when you have sex, but to not go overboard with either. Okay, now Aristotle wrote several hundred years ago, and he was the guy who first came up with this stuff, and so he did not have the advantage of reading people who came past him. But in light of what I've read of people who have come after Aristotle, I've come up with some ideas of my own for how to characterize the 7 deadly sins in terms of Aristotle's doctrine of the mean, which is different than what Aristotle originally came up with for some of them. And I'm going to describe this now. I have wrath here as an excess of concerning will or willfulness. The wrathful person is very much concerned with forcing his will on others, even to the point of hurting those others if need be. The apathetic person doesn't will much of anything. He has a very weak will, if any. He doesn't care much. And the zealous person does care about things, and he acts in a way to bring about what he wants to have happen. But he doesn't go to the extreme of wrath of, say, hurting people who frustrate his desires. Pride here is an excess regarding self-esteem. The proud person overestimates his own worth. The person of low self-esteem underestimates his own worth. Whereas the humble person has a better understanding of what his true worth is, of what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are. Envy here I give as an excess regarding emotional pain and pleasure. The envious person feels very strong pain at the sight of people who are better off than him or who are superior to him. And related to the idea of envy is Schadenfreude, which is feeling happy at the suffering of others. And particularly in the context of envy, feeling happy at the downfall of people who have been better off than you, at people who you have been envying. And the deficiency here is numbness, which is being unaware of your feelings, not feeling anything strongly. And the mean here between numbness on the one hand and envy and schadenfreude on the other is compassion and sympathetic joy. Compassion is feeling pain at the pain of others. Sympathetic joy is feeling joy at the happiness of others. And compassion contrasts with schadenfreude. They're both responses to the pain of others. Compassion feels pain at the pain of others. Schadenfreude feels happiness at the pain of others. Sympathetic joy and envy are both responses to the well-being, to others being better off. Envy resents that and feels pain. Sympathetic joy feels happy at the success of others. So compassion and sympathetic joy are what counter envy and schadenfreude. Then avarice here, I say, is an excess regarding a value, specifically intrinsic versus instrumental value. Aristotle gave it as a deficiency, but sometimes avarice, gluttony, and lust are all given as forms of what's called concupiscence. They're all forms of excessive desire. And so I've treated it as such here. And the idea here is that the avaricious person treats things of instrumental value as though they have intrinsic value. In contrast, the nihilist doesn't see much value in anything. He doesn't think anything has much of intrinsic value, and so he doesn't think anything has much instrumental value either, and doesn't care much about anything at all. The generous person recognizes the value of things. He recognizes the value of things he recognizes what does have intrinsic value. He recognizes that some things have instrumental value, and he recognizes the distinction between instrumental and intrinsic value. And so he can use his money to help others to live a better life. But the avaricious person will hold on to his money more, cares more about gaining money than about what he can do with it. And so there you have an excess of valuing, in that you're placing too much value on things of instrumental value, which should just be recognized as less value because they're only instrumentally valuable. Okay, gluttony I'm describing here as an excess regarding appetite and also purpose. I'm tying appetite and purpose together. For the deficiency, listlessness, the person has low in appetite from a sense of purposelessness. That what is the purpose of eating or drinking? It's as though they've given up on life. They don't even feel that eating and drinking serves much purpose. With temperance, you recognize the purpose behind eating and drinking, which is to serve life, to provide yourself with nourishment, to go on living. And the difference between temperance and gluttony is that temperance subordinates eating and drinking to the purpose of living, whereas gluttony subordinates living for the sake of eating and drinking. It considers eating and drinking so important that it becomes your reason for living, which is to put the cart before the horse. Lust here I describe as an excess regarding physical pleasure, and it's also concerning meaning here. And the deficiency here is anhedonia, which means an inability to experience pleasure. And lust here is focusing too much on pleasure. It's focusing on pleasure to the exclusion of the meaningfulness of the activity. And the mean here is love or passion. Passion within the context of a sexual relationship, love more broadly within that, or within the context of other relationships. And when people are having sex in a passionate sense, where the idea here is that it's meaningful for them, it's meaningful for them to be with each other. That it's not just to satisfy their carnal desires, but it's to express their love for one another. And their sexual desire for each other is being subordinated to their emotions, their emotional feelings for each other, what they mean to each other. And that informs what they're doing and makes it more meaningful than simply trying to fornicate with each other. In the context of relationships which are not sexual, or should not be sexual, love can help keep a person from indulging sexual thoughts towards a person. Like, for example, you're not supposed to have sexual relations with your children. And if you love them very deeply, then even if you find them attractive, you will not be considering any kind of sex with them. And so, when you focus on what a relationship means to you, you are better attuned to whether it should be a sexual relationship or not, and you can put sex in its place and subordinate sex to its proper place and to the meaning it plays in your life. And finally, sloth here is a deficiency with respect to effort and with respect to calling. Calling is the idea that there is something important you should be doing with your life, and the sense of what that is that you should be doing. The slothful person has an aversion to effort and has a very poor sense of calling, if any sense of calling at all. He doesn't really feel that his life is meaningful or purposeful, or that there's something he should be doing. And so he's more reluctant to make an effort to do anything at all. The excess here is workaholism. This is just where your sense of where you feel you should be working, but you don't really know what you're working towards. Just what's important to you is to work and work and work. And so you overwork, but without any clear goal in mind. And the mean here is industry, where you have a good sense of calling about what you should be doing with your life. And it inspires you and motivates you to work at it. Okay, this has been going on very long. Thank you for watching. If you think others should watch this video, please favorite it or like it.